All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show.
All right, you guys, on the line again, I've got the great Max Blumenthal from The Gray Zone. He wrote great books about Israel and about the terror war. Check him out on Amazon there. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, dude?
Doing well. Good to be back.
Great. Happy to have you here. And I'm also happy to be off Twitter, but that also means that I'm basically walking around with one eye closed, and I do not have my thumb on the pulse of all the latest breaking crazy things, which is a real detriment in this line of work. But thank goodness I know that you are there and not just observing, but also out ahead of the pack on the story of this kook who tried to kill Trump the other day. And I know that you got your hands on his ebook and have done all this other research. So I'm just hoping you can fill us in on who is this nut and what the hell is going on with him trying to kill the Republican Party presidential candidate.
Well, by this point, all the work I've done has made its way into mainstream media, but in probably sanitized form. And I was watching CNN, like some of the Sunday talk shows, not Sunday talk shows, just some of the evening talk shows. And the pundits are still saying, well, we just can't be sure what his political views were. It just seems like he was just some crazy guy. And yes, he was a mentally disturbed character. His name is Ryan Routh, and he had 74 arrests. Just think of that. He had 74 arrests, 3 or 4 of which were for possession of a weapon of mass destruction, which could include an assault rifle.
That's weird, though, isn't it? Like, to me, that just means biological, chemical, or nukes, Leave it at that. But go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think he actually had yellow cake, but he was, in 2002, held a standoff with the police where he barricaded himself in a building with an assault weapon. This is clearly like a criminal class drifter, someone who should have been monitored if he were going to a place, I don't know, like a frontline conflict zone where the U.S. was heavily involved, and then he was going to set up a presence very publicly, and that's what he proceeded to do. After Ukraine went to war with Russia in 2022, he shows up in Kiev in the middle of Maidan Square with a giant sign declaring that he is a recruiter for the International Legion and displaying flags of every country that supports Ukraine, and proceeds making contacts with all sorts of mercenaries, criminals, killers like him, drifters like himself, and grifters like MSNBC national security hack Malcolm Nance. And he delivers interviews to the New York Times about his efforts, tells Semaphore, this Beltway newsletter, that he's seeking to bring Afghan veterans of the Afghan army set up by the United States, who he said had been abandoned, into Ukraine on illegal passports through Pakistan and other third-party countries. And he's boasting about his ability to do all this. And no one seems to be stopping him. He's able to go back and forth to Washington. He goes on lobbying trips. He meets with the Helsinki Commission, which is a U.S.-backed commission, an anti-Russian government commission that sort of seeks ideas on taking on Russia. And he finds enough time to place a 291-page manifesto on Amazon outlining his views, which seem to be all over the place, except if you know how neocons think, he's echoing a lot of the neoconservative thinking and the anti-Russian thinking in Washington, and wishing that he can, in his words, burn down the Kremlin. He calls for the assassination of Vladimir Putin in order to destroy Russia, and calls for the United States to instigate, in his words, World War III with Russia, to push Russia towards nuclear warfare with a first strike on Moscow. He also fantasized about assassinating Donald Trump, weirdly for Trump's abandonment of the Iran deal. But he also hates Trump for January 6th and all sorts of other reasons. He's able to articulate his views over the course of 291 rambling pages. And so, the writing is rambling, but his views are fairly coherent. And they echo the thinking of people like John Bolton and other hardliners in Washington. So you have a very suspicious character here. Once again, and he's someone who had the CIA apparently watching him. The FBI had gotten bulletins about him twice, including for illegal handgun possession. He was flagged by other volunteers in Ukraine as a dangerous individual to the U.S. federal authorities. But he's able to operate freely, to return to the United States, and to get 300 to 500 yards from former President Donald Trump at Trump's personal golf course with a AK-47 style rifle and a sniper scope, posting himself up at a hole in the fence at the golf course, waiting over 12 hours for Trump to appear, and knowing that Donald Trump would be there despite this visit, last-minute visit to the golf course being not on Trump's schedule. So how did he know Trump was there? Did he get it from one of his media buddies that he made back in Kiev? Did he get the schedule from an inside source in the Trump campaign, inside Trump's inner circle, which would be pretty disturbing? What was his true relationship between Ryan Routh and the FBI? Did he have FBI agent in his ear grooming him and pushing him, as we saw the FBI do with so many disturbed Muslim American men during the War on Terror, pushing them into controlled terror plots? Was that FBI agent pro-Trump or anti-Trump? We don't know. We don't have any evidence there yet. We don't know what he's telling his interrogators. We don't know if they will tell us. What we do know is that this is an Oswaldian situation where you have a figure who is at least adjacent to U.S. intelligence and federal law enforcement and all sorts of shady characters that were passing through Ukraine in this petri dish of extremism and violence. And he was certainly radicalized while in Ukraine and developed strong anti-Russian tendencies that apparently translated into a desire to assassinate Donald Trump. This should be a much bigger scandal, but to tell the true story means, for the mainstream media, the corporate media, it would mean that they would have to actually start to examine some of the dangers of U.S. policy in Ukraine. And this is something we've been warning about constantly at the Gray Zone, writing about constantly, examining how white supremacists and various extremists wanted murderer who murdered a couple in Florida had been flocking to Kiev and fighting with the Ukrainian army, alongside the Ukrainian army, and conducting interviews on Fox News and other networks, and how there were bulletins that the DHS was keeping secret about the fear of the U.S. federal authorities, security services, about the return of these individuals. We'd done that reporting at the Gray Zone, and it was always dismissed as Kremlin propaganda. So here we are at a point where you now have the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev wondering if the Ukrainian government actually hired Ryan Routh to kill Donald Trump. Is that just Kremlin propaganda? No, I think it's actually a fair question. We don't know the answer to any of these questions, but all of these questions are salient And then just finally, there is no evidence that the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump by this lone wolf young person who had no political leaning that we can discern or social media footprint, unlike almost everyone of his generation, that he was put up to it by some quote unquote deep state actor. And we don't have the evidence for Routh, although his ideological guidelines seem pretty distinct and clear. In closing, you can forgive people for being conspiratorial about this because it's not just one, but two assassination attempts, and they both occur after the lawfare campaigns against Donald Trump to wrap him up in the courts fail to stop him from potentially becoming president in November. So, I think all the cards are on the table now.
Yeah, listen, I think that's fair. After the first one, I was joking with a friend of mine that, this guy is a lone kook, no apparent ties to anyone. I'm like, I guess any jerk with a rifle can do something horrible, so doesn't seem to be the thing. But then if you go back to the 60s, that this was the same story that they said about the guy that shot Jack Kennedy, except that what if they said about this guy in Pennsylvania that he had been stationed at a top secret U-2 base in Japan and then had defected to Russia and then had come back and lived in Cuba. And then there was a double of him in Mexico City and he's representing the communists, but hanging out with right wingers and all of this. You would wonder whether he was just as disconnected from power as this goofball in Pennsylvania. Now, just 8 weeks later or 7 weeks later or something, somebody else takes a shot. And he's Oswaldian, as you said. He's going to Ukraine and participating in this stuff. Doesn't look like he was at any top secret U-2 base, but he was wrapped up in very anti-Trump politics here and potentially with powerful players. And I wanted to go back to something you said, and I appreciate the way you don't speculate. You just ask questions in straight English language there without presuming anything and all of that. But I wanted to elaborate on one point that you said, as I did read this in the New York Times, that according to them, one of the people who noticed this guy in Ukraine and did not like him and didn't seem to be running him was a CIA officer. And she said, I guess believably, that when she got home, she reported this guy to whoever else, customs and whoever, and said, this guy's dangerous. Keep an eye on him. He's a real kook and this and that. And so it would be fair to speculate, if one were a host, not a journalist, that the FBI might have taken an interest in him after that, right? There are multiple people who said so, but this one was a CIA officer, according to her story. So it would only make sense that the FBI would have interviewed him and begun some type of relationship with him, maybe infiltrated an informant into his life or some kind of thing. All I'm saying is that those are fair questions. They clearly are, just because of the high level of the person, the importance of the person who had reported him when she came home. And that just seemed, notable to me. And then, but we don't have, in any of the major press, they're not addressing this at all, whether this guy was on the FBI's radar in any way, or what are they saying about it?
I mean, the FBI said that they had an investigation into him, or they had a report about him in 2019 about him possessing an illegal weapon, but they didn't have any way of turning that into a criminal investigation.
But they say nothing about since his time in Ukraine.
Nothing. And an FBI spokesman has said that, in so many words, that events overseas could increase risk to presidential candidates. So at the very least, they're acknowledging a certain level of blowback for U.S. foreign policy and, directly connecting it to this case. I mean, this is clearly a case of blowback. It's also a case of, they say turn down the rhetoric, and, the rhetoric is too hot right now. But they won't say what rhetoric could have possibly instigated or triggered a figure like Ryan Routh. And it's all the rhetoric about how Donald Trump is going to come into office and shut down the Ukraine proxy war by ending or severely limiting U.S. military aid to Ukraine. He's going to abandon Ukraine, or as David Muir, the ABC moderator in the debate was asking Trump, he's not going to let Ukraine win. He doesn't want Ukraine to win. All these childish conceptions of the war being put forward, and that the United States now has a short window in which it can provide Ukraine with the ability to use Storm Shadow missiles and other long-range guided missiles to strike Ukraine, to strike Moscow, to strike oil in refineries in and around Moscow, to strike military bases deep in Russia, and to escalate the war. It has to be done because Trump's coming in. So the logical conclusion you can draw if you're someone who has the propensity to kill and believes these things is, look, if we just get Donald Trump out of the way, Ukraine will win, and it needs to win for civilization to win, which is the same messaging that Joe Biden has been sending. So that's what I think inspired Ryan Routh. I don't see what else could have driven him. When you read, as I did, in almost one sitting, his manifesto, he says it over and over again that is what he believes.
Mm-hmm. Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code Scott and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
Well, I guess it was just a matter of time. I drank so much coffee I turned into some. Hey guys, check out the Scott Horton Show special blend at MoondosArtisanCoffee.com. It's a blend of organically grown Ethiopian and Sumatran coffee beans. Two very different coffees combined to create a unique blend. Ethiopia is smooth and medium-bodied. Sumatra, rich, heavy-bodied coffee. And it's got caffeine, lots of it, which is good for if you have to drive drunk or get up in the morning. Click through from the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org to save 10% on your order. It's the Scott Horton Show blend from Moondos Artisan Coffee. Hey, you guys, coming up this October 7th through the 11th, join Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Podcast, the heroic Ron Paul, the great Tom Woods, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, myself, and many other great speakers for the online Expat Money Summit 2024. My presentation will be on the subject of my new book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, which is not quite out yet. And learn how you can reclaim your freedom by moving abroad, legally reduce your tax bill, and protect your assets. More than 8,000 people attended last year, and it's free. My guys Kyle Anzalone and Dave DeCamp from the Institute and antiwar.com will be joining a panel discussion as well. Just go to 2024.expatmoneysummit.com for all the info. That's 2024.expatmoneysummit.com. But, in the Washington Post, they had a headline that Trump accuses with no evidence whatsoever that this guy was inspired by his opponent's rhetoric. And then in paragraph, 10 or something, they say, well, the guy said Trump is a unique threat to democracy. I'm paraphrasing, but something very close to that. And then the Post says,
where do you get that from?
Which is something that both Biden and Harris have said repeatedly. So
yeah, he tweeted
their
democracy
own
is on the
story
ballot,
debunks their headline and says that actually, he's using the exact words they use, in fact.
He tweeted democracy is on the ballot. That's a Kamala Harris slogan. We can't read that tweet, though, now. I mean, you can find screenshots of it because his Twitter account and his Facebook account and his Instagram account, where he lays out his views very clearly along with his history, has been nuked because I guess DHS came in and told, or the FBI came in and told the owners of these social media platforms, including the free speech Elon Musk, that they had to take it down. So they're erasing history in the eyes of the public and depriving us of the ability to do what I guess you could call crowdsourced research.
Right. Yeah, it's so unfair. And, I got another example of this was, I'm sorry, man, forgive me. I'm almost certain it was the Corpus Christi attack, but it could have been, no, it was Pensacola. It was like a Saudi AQAP type in Pensacola who shot up a military base. And the guy had posted his whole manifesto on Twitter. And the New York Post had the foresight to get the archive of it made, to get the screenshot of it at archive.is so that they linked to it in their article. And of course, they highlighted the Islamist mumbo jumbo and completely ignored the part where he explained very clearly that this was blowback, backdraft terrorism from specific violent political actions the U.S. government had taken in the region, so to speak. And then, so I found their archive thing, and I wrote an article about it and quoted the whole thing, and you can't find that anywhere else on the entire internet.
Yeah, it was the same with Omar
nowhere
Mateen.
else that has that.
Same with the Pulse nightclub shooter. I mean, there's so much intrigue surrounding that. I got to delve deeply into that through my book, The Management of Savagery. This Muslim Afghan American shooter, Omar Mateen, shot up a gay nightclub that was mostly, Puerto Rican in Orlando. Mass casualty event, horrific killing. And the media decided to go with Omar Mateen is a closet homosexual. And without any evidence, he was a repressed Muslim homosexual, and that's why he did it, without any evidence. It turns out when you listen to the standoff call between Mateen and a hostage negotiator, he's explaining exactly why he did it. He did it because he was radicalized by the dirty war in Syria, which the CIA was sponsoring, and he was a supporter of ISIS, and his friend was one of the first suicide bombers to carry out an attack on the Syrian army that the U.S. was trying to take out in Aleppo. And he said that he wanted to be next to do his thing. And he believed wrongly that the U.S. was against ISIS because they were carrying out airstrikes on some ISIS targets, when the U.S. was cynically using ISIS to weaken the Syrian government. But this was blowback. Again, a clear case of blowback. And the U.S. media refused to tell that story. And then you have all of the school shootings in which the shooter, this has happened multiple times in the last 2 years, the shooter is trans. So there's apparently a fear that if the manifestos of those shooters get out, and this really gets right-wingers going, somewhat justifiably, is that it will inspire anti-trans violence and anti-trans bigotry. And so the manifestos are concealed from the public. And this is, to me, it's just such an abuse of history, of the facts, and a dereliction of duty by journalists to fail to demand these manifestos to inform the public on what the motives of these characters was. I mean, in this case, it's much more political than someone who's mentally disturbed, who wants to make a gender transition. It's about U.S. foreign policy and how it's harming us at home, something that's not supposed to happen because the United States is geographically so far away from all of the killing fields we create around the world. And it's just Slavic men who are supposed to do the dying, and it can't possibly affect our leaders. It can't come home. So the media right now is engaged clearly in a cover-up with a bunch of limited hangouts about how this is just about angry rhetoric on both sides.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, who knows what he saw over there? I saw, one report that said that what he had claimed that he had fought there, but nothing else confirmed that. And then, but I guess I saw one thing that said that he had, I think it was the Post that said, nah, I take that back. I'm sorry. But it was a credible report from before this.
Well, he said he was
that
too
he had
old to be
succeeded in
accepted.
recruiting one guy. That
Yeah.
was the most credit that they gave him for actual participation, I guess. Is that right? Do you know?
Well, I would just say if anyone wants to, do some reporting, everyone's always asking me like, Max, how do I do journalism and this and that? Like young people ask that. You just pick up the phone and make calls and ask questions. And Ryan Routh on a web page he set up called the Taiwan International Legion. You can find it right now if you Google it. Listed all his contacts and put their phone numbers down. Their numbers are there. And some of these contacts would be like so-and-so from Morocco, so-and-so from Syria, criminal Mike from Krakow. I mean, who are these people and what did they do and how did they get to Ukraine? I haven't seen any journalists try to put that together. I'm a little bit too hard pressed right now to produce journalism on all sorts of topics because I'm the editor of the Gray Zone to dig into it. But it's all there. It's all sitting there. And there's a story to tell. Again, it's Oswaldian. And I think many different images of one person will emerge that might contradict one another, but they all exist within the parallax view established by the U.S. national security state in Kiev.
Hey, there's a good plug for a good podcast. Parallax Views.
Yeah. I mean, there should be a series on this guy. If only like right wingers were into that kind of NPR style podcasts, like with that voice. He was there in Kiev. No idea where he was.
Well, I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but as long as we're on this topic, these many cross-referenced topics, Trevor Aronson, who had published the book, first a Mother Jones article, and then the book, The Terror Factory, about the FBI entrapping Muslims. More than 300 of them during especially the Bush years, but the Obama years too. And there's some real terrorist attacks and attempted ones mixed in there, but a hell of a lot of frame-ups. He actually has done a multi-part podcast all about Omar Mateen and the Pulse nightclub. And he was nice enough to send me the transcripts of it all, but I still haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But I hope to interview him about that. And I just know him to be a great journalist. So I'm sure that's good. And for people who like podcasts,
I'll tell you right now,
I'd
Omar
recommend
Mateen's
that.
father is a confirmed FBI informant, Sadiq Mateen.
Yeah.
And he somehow appeared behind Hillary Clinton after the Pulse nightclub shooting.
Right.
At one of her rallies. He was strategically somehow positioned right in the camera, right behind her. And his sign said something like Hillary for national security. It was like obviously someone put him up to this. And he delivered an interview afterwards declaring that Hillary Clinton will protect national security. And that's why he's supporting her. Like,
what a weird
how much more intrigue, how many more layers of intrigue can we get here?
Yeah, that is strange. And I would point out, I think Glenn Greenwald has done great reporting about this back at The Intercept, if people want to search that up too. A lot of this came out at the trial of his wife, where it came out that, man, this guy wasn't gay at all. It had nothing to do with this at all. And even that targeting the nightclub had nothing to do with it being a gay nightclub. It was just that his first target was Disney World, but he decided that they had way too much security there to try to get through. And so instead, he would go to the first nightclub that came up when he Googled nightclub Orlando. And the first thing that came up was the Pulse nightclub. And then there was even, I don't know the source anymore, but I believe it was testimony from that trial that said that when he got there, one of the first things he said was, "Where are all the girls?" So it had nothing to do. And you think about, and you'd have to remember it and live through it and paid attention at the time. But the level of BS in the media about how gay this guy was and how that was his motive, was that he hated himself and he hated all other gay people because Mohammed hates gay people. And so now all gay people got to get on board for the terror war because the Islamists are coming for you next and all of this stuff. It was like on level 10. It was like, selling the war in Ukraine or selling Russiagate or something. They really pushed that so hard, and perfectly peaceful people became bloodthirsty warmongers. They thought like in self-defense over that. You know what I mean? Yeah. They just like suborned the warmongering of third parties who otherwise would have never like turned that direction at all. I saw it happen. It's crazy.
Yeah, I remember that too.
It's just, man. And being government means never having to say you're sorry. You know what I mean? It's whatever, dude.
That's what I think they're going to do with Routh is kind of just wait long enough to release drip, 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 incremental pieces of the testimony he delivers about his motives and hope that everybody forgets about it. Because it really threatens the key priority of the national security bureaucracy.
Yeah. And, you know, I won't give the guy credit. I refuse to, like, presume him innocent really on anything. He's just Giuliani to me, and he'll never be Ron Paul. But, you know, I saw where somebody quoted him saying, hey, look, man, it was at a speech the other day, and he just says random shit. Like, who knows? But he goes, you know, we don't need to be enemies with China. We can get along with China. We can get along with Russia. We can get along with everybody. Look, we're not going to let them screw us anymore. We're going to do this and that and make sure everything is cool. But no, we don't want to have like a whole new era of like being enemies of people and stuff like that. We don't have to do that stuff. It'll be fine. And like you can see why they hate him. They hate him so much, even for just kind of popularizing that point of view, and especially on the right. That just because you're a tough guy doesn't mean you got to be a hawk. Come on, be smart. And, you know, just disbelieve these kooks. I mean, who could believe in them? By the way, speaking of which, before I let you go, I saw, do I have this right? Just someone else showed it to me, and I only watched it on, I missed the part where you and Aaron Mateen introduced the video, but someone sent me a YouTube of you and Aaron introducing a Kamala Harris campaign ad. Was that real? And if so, what in the hell was that?
The ad?
Yeah.
Or us introducing it?
Well, I believe it wasn't a deep fake of you and Aaron. But I mean, what was that ad that you guys played there? Was that a legit Kamala Harris campaign ad?
Yeah, it's run by a pro-Kamala super PAC. It's playing in swing states and areas that are heavily populated by Polish Americans and Ukrainian Americans. Uh-huh. And it is the most belligerent ad I've ever seen a Democratic candidate run. It basically pledges to destroy Russia and compares Vladimir Putin to Joseph Stalin.
Calls him a communist.
And it's the super PAC's run by Tom Malinowski, who is a Democratic rep from New Jersey, who is a longtime kind of neocon hawk within the progressive, like social progressive foreign policy neocon, who's been working through the sort of NGO and national security bureaucracy for 20 years and is sort of PNAC, Project for a New American Century adjacent. But there's just a strategy consistent with the Democratic Party's, ethnic politics, where they'll just do anything to win over certain small ethnic groups in swing states, which is where the whole campaign is taking place. And pretty much the whole campaign's taking place in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
That was a line she used in the debate, too. She goes, oh, yeah, you tell all the Polish voters in Illinois that you're going to let Russia kill them all. And,
yeah. I mean, you have something like 600,000 Polish Americans in Pennsylvania. That's sizable. So that's what this is about. And it sickens me that you have these sort of ethnic interest groups in the United States, like the Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans, who come here and seek to use the United States to bomb their former countries, and that the U.S. government caters to that in such a cynical fashion just to win elections. It shows a special danger that the U.S. political system presents to the rest of the world. We can't have a sane or sober policy toward Cuba because of Florida politics.
Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Great stuff as always. And everybody, go to the Gray Zone YouTube channel. And the headline is Kamala launches belligerent new Cold War ad blitz to see that video. And then thegrayzone.com for all this great stuff and the rest of the guys too. Thank you, Max.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.